The first sample came from a permafrost core drilled in the Siberian deep, a place that hadn't seen the sun in 30,000 years, and it looked like nothing more than a smear of trapped emerald dust. I remember holding the slide up to the light in my cryolab, the hum of the sub-zero freezers a familiar lullaby, and feeling not alarm, but a profound academic curiosity. We called it chrysanema, the golden thread, because under the electron microscope, its dormant spores were structured in perfect, breathtaking fractals that pulsed with a faint internal luminescence, a biological impossibility. My grant proposals celebrated it as a potential key to extremophilic adaptation, a relic of a primordial world, and the funding agencies ate it up, showering our remote station, Outpost Boreas, with enough cash to keep the generators running for a decade. We were fools. Of course, every last one of us, celebrating the beauty of the Viper coiled at our feet. The initial reports were easy to dismiss, just flickers of static in the global news cycle. Anomalous algal blooms in the North Atlantic, their chlorophyll counts off the charts, glowing with a soft viridian light on satellite imagery, patches of the Amazon producing oxygen at rates that defied botanical science, the air growing so rich it made climbers at the base camps lightheaded. Governments called it a symptom of climate shift, a planetary fever breaking in strange new ways, and the media ran stories about the healing Earth, a Gaia-esque recovery that made for wonderful B-roll footage. But I knew what it was. I saw the fractal patterns of the blooms from orbit, a mirror of the spores on my slide, and a cold knot of dread began to twist in my gut. I tried to warn them, publishing a paper on the potential for a cascading bioinvasion from a prehistoric microorganism, but it was rejected by every major journal. Dr. Aris Thorne, the brilliant but eccentric recluse of the Arctic, was seeing monsters in microbes. I was told to stick to verifiable data, not apocalyptic speculation. Verifiable data came a month later. When the first chrysanema bloom reached the coast of Portugal, it wasn't just in the water anymore. A fine, glittering green dust settled on the seaside towns, and overnight, a new kind of foliage erupted from the soil, from the cracks in the cobblestones, even from the sides of buildings. It was beautiful, terrifyingly so. Crystalline ferns that chimed like glass in the wind, vines that bore fruit like clusters of opals, and great, silent flowers that unfurled petals of spun moonlight, tracking the sun with unnerving precision. Tourists flocked to see the miracle of Lisbon, and for a week, the world was enchanted. They didn't see the price of admission. The local fauna vanished. Birds fell silent, their nests choked with iridescent moss. Insects disappeared. The new flora was a silent, creeping monoculture, and it tolerated no competition. Then the people started getting sick. They called it viridian lung, a respiratory ailment that didn't respond to any known treatment. It started with a persistent cough that brought up specks of green, then shortness of breath, fatigue, and, finally, a strange placidity, as if the will to fight was simply being scrubbed from their minds. The victims would just sit in their homes, staring out at the beautiful alien landscape as it consumed their world, their breathing growing shallower until it stopped. That's when I broke protocol. I packed every terabyte of data I had, torched my lab at Outpost Boreas so no one could weaponize my research, and fled south on a decommissioned icebreaker, a ghost running from a ghost story no one else believed. By the time I made landfall in what was left of British Columbia, The world had started to listen, but it was far too late. The Chrysanema, we called it the Verdant, now was everywhere. It rode the jet streams, the ocean currents, its spores, a glittering, omnipresent dust in the atmosphere. It wasn't invading, it was assimilating. It was terraforming, not with machines and lasers, but with life itself. A patient, inexorable botanical engine rewriting the planet's biology, one cell at a time. The initial panic was exactly what you'd expect riots. Blame. Talking heads on collapsing news networks screaming at each other while the world outside their windows turned green. Militaries tried to fight it. They dropped firebombs on the new forests. But the crystalline flora was strangely fire retardant, the flames only seeming to temper it, making it stronger. They sprayed defoliants. But the Verdant's biology was so alien it metabolized the poison as food, growing back thicker, angrier. Every weapon we had was designed to kill things that bled, that burned, that broke. We didn't know how to kill a garden. We didn't understand we weren't fighting an army. We were fighting the concept of life itself, just a different, older, and infinitely more patient version of it. I found a group of survivors in the ruins of Seattle, a ragged collection of former soldiers, engineers, and one grizzled ex-logger named Kale who knew the old forests better than his own skin. He hated the Verdant with a primal passion, not because it was deadly, but because it was silent. A forest is supposed to make noise. Doc, he'd grumble, cleaning his antique bolt-action rifle. Birds, bugs, wind in the leaves. This new shit. It just watches. He was right. There was an intelligence to it, a coordinated strategy we couldn't grasp. It would lie dormant for weeks, letting us think we'd found a safe zone, then explode in a synchronized growth event that could swallow a city block in an hour. It learned. We used sonic frequencies to try and shatter the crystalline structures of the larger plants, and, for a while, it worked. The next generation grew with organic dampeners woven into their cellular walls, absorbing the sound and rendering our weapons useless. It was a planetary immune system, and we were the virus it was methodically, impersonally trying to eradicate. We learned to survive on the fringes, in the concrete canyons and underground tunnels where the Verdant struggled for sunlight. We became scavengers, ghosts haunting the corpse of our own civilization. We learned that the spores were less concentrated after heavy rain, that the larger floral growths had a rest cycle tied to the moon, that some of the opal fruits were not only edible but could counteract the early stages of viridian lung. We learned to fight back, not with bombs, but with our own biology. We discovered that a certain human blood type O negative contained a protein that was toxic to the Verdant's root systems. It became our only weapon, a crude biological agent we'd extract and mix into a slurry, a poison made of ourselves. We were turning our own lifeblood into a defoliant, a grim irony that wasn't lost on any of us. The true awakening, the moment we understood the sheer, hopeless scale of it all, came when we tried to retake the Tacoma Narrows Bridge. It was a strategic imperative, our only viable link to scavenger teams on the peninsula. The bridge was draped in thick, pulsating vines, but our scouts reported a low spore count. We went in at dawn with a team of 30. Armed with Kale's O-negative slurry sprayers and whatever scavenged weapons we had left. The attack was a success at first. The slurry ate through the vines, melting them into a foul-smelling sludge. We made it halfway across the first span, the rusted red of the towers, a beacon of the old world. Then the forest on the other side of the strait responded. It wasn't a slow growth. It was a violent, instantaneous reaction, a wave of shimmering green energy, a visible pulse of coordinated life washed over the landscape. Every plant, every vine, every spore-bearing flower for miles turned towards us. The air grew thick, shimmering with a density of spores so great it was like breathing glitter and glass. Our rebreathers clogged in seconds. Men choked, clawing at their throats, their screams turning into wet gurgles. But that wasn't the worst part. From the heart of the forest on the far shore, something rose. It wasn't a plant, not a single organism, but a coordinated structure, 1,000 tons of alien biomass moving as one. A great crystalline spire, half a mile high, assembled itself from the surrounding flora, humming with a low, resonant frequency that made our teeth ache and our eyeballs vibrate. It was a synaptic node, a control tower, a general on a battlefield of grass and leaves. It pulsed once, a blinding flash of emerald light, and the entire bridge superstructure groaned. The verdant that we had poisoned didn't just grow back. It erupted. Its growth accelerated 1,000-fold. Vines as thick as pythons burst from the concrete, twisting and crushing cars, tearing through the asphalt. I saw Kale, brave, stubborn Kale, wrapped in a cocoon of flowering creepers, his rifle falling from his hands as the life was squeezed out of him, a look of profound, weary shock on his face. He wasn't just being killed, he was being composted, broken down, becoming part of the new world. I was dragged away by one of the few other survivors as our desperate retreat began. The sound of twisting metal and that terrible, low hum filling the air. We watched from a collapsed highway overpass as the spire on the far shore slowly, deliberately, pulled the entire bridge apart, its great cables snapping like rotten thread, the two massive spans collapsing into the water below in a final, thunderous roar of dying steel. And as the dust settled, the spire dissolved, melting back into the silent, watchful forest. Its work done. We had never been fighting a mindless infestation. We were fighting an intelligence, a distributed consciousness existing on a planetary scale. It hadn't just defeated us. It had made a statement. It had erased our greatest engineering feat in the region with casual, biological contempt. That night, huddled in the cold, damp dark of a sewer tunnel, listening to the soft, rhythmic chiming of the crystal ferns growing just above our heads, the final, terrible truth settled over me. The verdant didn't hate us. You don't hate a mild infection or a patch of mold. You just cleanse it. We had been categorized, deemed a biological error, a fleeting sickness on a world that was being returned to its true owner. We mistook our dominance for permanence, our technology for strength. We thought we were the gardeners, but we were just the weeds. And as I looked at the faces of the few who had survived, dirty, exhausted, and hollowed out by loss, I knew what we had to do. We couldn't outsmart this thing. We couldn't outgun it. To survive, we would have to become a disease it couldn't cure. We would have to become a poison, a blight, a cancer in its perfect, silent garden. They wanted to cleanse the planet of the human virus. And we would have to show them just how virulent, how stubborn, and how utterly savage a virus can be when it's fighting for its own extinction. The war for Earth was over. The war for our right to exist as a plague had just begun. The days that followed the fall of the bridge were a gray smear of shock and whispered grief. We holed up in the skeletal remains of a waterfront warehouse, the constant, gentle chiming of the crystal flora outside a maddening funeral dirge for the dozen souls we'd lost. Hope, what little we had left, had been crushed along with the steel and concrete of the Narrows. In that suffocating silence, my theory took root in the minds of the survivors, not as a strategy, but as a last, desperate prayer. We were no longer fighting to win. We were fighting to leave a scar. We would become the blight, the running sore on this new, pristine world. The first step was to abandon the pretense of reclamation. We were not soldiers holding a line. We were an infection seeking a host. We needed a new kind of warren, a place not to defend, but to fester. Marcus, a former Marine Force recon captain whose face was a roadmap of hard-won scars and quiet fury, organized the migration. He led our dwindling band of about 50 souls away from the exposed coast and deep into the city's concrete heart, into the catacombs of the University of Washington. We made our new home in the sub-basement levels of the particle physics laboratory, a place buried so deep beneath layers of earth and reinforced concrete that the verdant's influence was a dull, distant hum rather than an omnipresent threat. We called it the phage, after the viruses that infect bacteria, a name that suited our new creed. It became our sanctuary and our laboratory. There, I, along with a quiet, ferociously intelligent biochemist named Lena, set about refining our singular, gruesome weapon. The O-negative slurry was effective but inefficient. We were bleeding our most valuable resource, literally, for temporary gains. Lena, who had lost her husband and daughter to Viridian lung in the first wave, poured her grief into her work with a terrifying focus. She saw the verdant not as a life form, but as a complex chemical equation, and she was determined to solve it. We built a makeshift centrifuge from a V8 engine and scavenged parts, a roaring beast in the heart of our silent world, to isolate the specific protein responsible for the toxic effect. We discovered we could amplify its potency 100-fold, creating a concentrated serum. A single drop of this new agent, which we morbidly christened Kale's Kiss, could sterilize a 10-square-foot patch of the most aggressive verdant growth, turning it into a black, oozing wound. But this new potency came at a cost. The serum was hideously unstable and dangerous to handle. More importantly, it required a constant, fresh supply of O-negative blood, a resource that was walking, talking, and dying among us. We had 7 donors left, 7 precious wells of life we had to drain to create our poison. The moral calculus was brutal. Every mission to poison the world above cost us a piece of ourselves, leaving our donors pale, weak, and closer to the edge. We weren't just a blight on the verdant. We were consuming ourselves from the inside out. For a while, our new tactics worked. Marcus's teams, which he called vectors, would move out under the cover of the densest rainstorms, using the sewer systems as their highways. They didn't engage in battles. They committed acts of biological sabotage. They would find the nexus points of the verdant's root systems, the thick, pulsating arteries of biomass that fed entire sectors, and inject Kale's Kiss directly into them. The effect was devastating. Great swaths of the crystalline forest would wither and die, turning a sickly necrotic black. We were creating dead zones, cankers on the green skin of the planet. We were leaving our scars. The intelligence of the verdant, however, was patient and adaptive. It began to respond. The first sign was the appearance of what we called sentinels. These were towering, flower-like structures, reminiscent of the spire that had destroyed the bridge, but smaller and more numerous. They grew near our dead zones, their massive, moon-like petals acting as sophisticated biological sensors. They could detect the telltale protein signature of our people from a quarter-mile away. And when they did, they would emit a low, resonant hum, a silent alarm that alerted the entire local ecosystem. Then came the harriers, the first truly mobile fauna the verdant had produced. They were horrifying amalgamations of plant and animal, something like a six-legged wolf woven from thorned vines and animated by a core of glowing, malevolent chlorophyll. They were fast, silent, and relentless, their only purpose to hunt the source of the blight, us. Our war of sabotage became a desperate cat-and-mouse game. The vectors had to move faster, stay underground longer, and pray the sentinels didn't catch their scent. Losses mounted. The psychological toll was immense. We were becoming ghosts, living in darkness, manufacturing poison from our veins, and being hunted by plant monsters from a fever dream. The breaking point came when our primary centrifuge failed, a bearing seized, and the machine tore itself apart in a shriek of tortured metal, destroying half of our refined serum and severely wounding 2 technicians. Lena's cold composure finally cracked. She stared at the wreckage, her hands shaking. "It's not enough." "Eris," she whispered, her voice raw. "We're rationing ourselves to death. We can create the poison, but we can't create the blood. Without a major new source, we'll be gone in 3 months." That's when a long-shot gamble became our only option. A drone we'd sent out months prior on a final, looping reconnaissance flight before its power died had transmitted a single, corrupted image packet. It was a glimpse of the old Red Cross blood center downtown, and remarkably, the building was still standing, encased in a massive, semi-translucent dome of crystalline flora, a thorn womb, as we called them. It was a long shot, but inside that building was a cryogenic storage facility, potentially holding thousands of units of frozen blood plasma, our salvation locked away in the heart of the beast. Marcus argued against it, calling it a suicide run. The area was deep within what we called the verdant heart, where spore counts were lethal and harriers were known to patrol in packs. But desperation is a powerful motivator. We spent a week planning, studying the drone's fragmented data, mapping the sewer routes, and preparing the last of Kale's Kiss not as a weapon of attrition, but as a key. Lena theorized that a massive, concentrated dose could temporarily overwhelm the thorn womb, creating a molten breach we could slip through. We chose a team of 10. Our best and quietest vectors, led by Marcus himself. I insisted on going. I was no soldier, but this was my theory, my sin, and I would not send others to pay for it while I hid in a lab. The journey through the sewers was a descent into a nightmare. The verdant's roots had breached the tunnels in many places, thick, pulsating tendrils that glowed with a soft green light, turning the claustrophobic darkness into a sickly, submarine world. Twice we had to backtrack, our way blocked by pulsing, organic dams. When we finally emerged into a maintenance basement 2 blocks from the blood center, the air itself felt different, heavy and sweet with the scent of alien blossoms and decay. The thorn womb was larger than we'd imagined, a cathedral of interlocking crystal thorns that pulsed with a slow, rhythmic emerald light. as if the entire structure was breathing. Harriers moved around its perimeter, their vine-like muscles rippling as they sniffed the air, their silence more terrifying than any growl. We waited for the precise moment Lena had calculated. When the structure's internal energy cycle was at its lowest, Marcus gave the signal, and our two designated breachers fired canisters of Kale's Kiss at the base of the dome. The effect was immediate. The crystal sizzled and melted, collapsing into a bubbling, black ooze. An unearthly shriek echoed from the dome, not a sound in the air, but a psychic scream that vibrated in our bones. "Go now," Marcus yelled, pushing us through the breach. Inside was a world of surreal horror and beauty. The building's interior was a garden, its walls draped in phosphorescent moss, its floors carpeted with flowers that bloomed and died in hypnotic cycles. But the verdant here was different. It was organized. Specialized organisms tended to the structure, repairing the walls, cultivating spore pods. We weren't in a random overgrowth. We were inside a living, breathing organism. We found the cryogenic vault in the sub-basement. The emergency power had held. The liquid nitrogen tanks were still cold. As our tech expert worked frantically to bypass the locks, I saw it. In the center of the main atrium, suspended from the ceiling by thick, artery-like vines, was a new structure, a mind bloom. It was a massive, orchid-like flower, its petals slowly opening and closing, and within its translucent core, I could see shapes, human shapes, floating in a nutrient-rich gel. They were the bodies of people who had been captured, not killed, but integrated. Their nervous systems wired directly into the Verdant's network. The Verdant wasn't just killing us. It was studying us, learning from us, assimilating us into its own consciousness. It had baited a trap with something we needed, and it was using our own dead to understand its enemy. "We have it," the tech yelled, pulling a cryogenic container onto a dolly. At that exact moment, the mind bloom pulsed, a wave of psionic pressure slamming into us. The captured bodies in the core twitched in unison, their mouths opening in a silent, collective scream. The Harriers outside poured through the breach we'd created, and the very walls of the building began to shift, sealing our escape route. The mission was no longer about retrieval, it was about survival. Marcus bellowed orders, laying down suppressing fire as we fell back, dragging the container with us. We lost 3 people in the first 30 seconds, dragged down by constrictor vines that erupted from the floor. We fought our way to a loading bay, the steel door, our only hope. As Marcus and I struggled to manually crank it open, Lena stood her ground, unloading her weapon at the advancing Harriers, her face a mask of cold, scientific fury. A Harrier lunged, and she met it, jamming the muzzle of her weapon into its glowing core and firing, blowing it apart in a shower of green ichor and thorns. But another flanked her, its bladed forelimb scything through the air. She went down with a choked cry, and the last thing I saw was the verdant vines pulling her back towards the mind bloom. We got the door open just enough to slip through, sealing it behind us as we stumbled back into the toxic daylight of the dead city, leaving 5 of our best behind. We had the blood, a treasure trove that could keep our war going for another year. But as we limped back toward the phage, the weight of our prize felt no different from the weight of our losses. I looked back at the pulsing thorn womb, a living tomb for our friends, and understood. The Verdant had learned from our attack on the bridge. It had learned to set traps, to study, and to assimilate. We had set out to become a poison, but in our arrogance, we had forgotten the most fundamental rule of biology: life adapts. And our enemy was not just adapting, it was evolving, turning our own minds and bodies into weapons against us. Our scar was no longer just a wound, it was becoming a roadmap for our own destruction. The return to the phage was a silent, shuffling procession of ghosts. We carried the cryogenic container of blood plasma like a holy relic. Its frosted surface, a cold comfort against the 5 fresh, gaping holes in our ranks. There was no celebration, no relief. We had won a year of survival, but the price was etched into the hollows of our eyes. The victory tasted of ash. Marcus became a creature of pure, coiled rage. He locked himself in the armory for 2 days, methodically disassembling, cleaning, and reassembling every weapon in our arsenal until the scent of gun oil and solvent was a permanent part of him. When he emerged, the grief had been baked out of him, replaced by a hard, unforgiving certainty. He saw the verdant as a conventional enemy again, one that could be bled and broken, and he began planning more aggressive, more frequent strikes, convinced that overwhelming force was the only answer we had left. He was wrong, and I knew it. The mind bloom had changed everything. We were no longer fighting a garden, we were fighting a brain, and its neurons were the roots and vines that crisscrossed the globe. Our pinprick attacks with Kyle's kiss were the equivalent of giving a leviathan a paper cut. It would heal, it would learn, and it would remember the source of the pain. The blood we'd won wasn't a means to continue the old war. It had to be the fuel for a new one. I tried to explain this to him in the cold hum of the central command room, our faces illuminated by the flickering schematics on the monitors. "We can't keep punching it, Marcus," I argued, my voice tight with a desperate urgency. "It feels the punches. It knows where they're coming from. It set a trap for us, and we walked right into it. It wanted to see how we fight, what we value. It sacrificed that node to capture Lena, to capture your soldiers. It's learning from their minds." "So we hide," he shot back, his voice a low growl. "We let it grow stronger while we cower down here and die of old age." "No," I said, leaning over the tactical map, a satellite image of the city now almost entirely green. "We stop attacking the body, and we go for the nervous system. The mind blooms. They're not just prisons or study centers. They have to be connected. A distributed consciousness on this scale needs to coordinate. It needs a network. If we can find that network, we can poison the signal. We can give the Leviathan a seizure." My theory was met with stony silence. It was the desperate leap of a scientist, not the clear objective of a soldier. To the others, it sounded like I was suggesting we could fight a ghost with a radio. The phage was fractured, caught between Marcus's doctrine of aggressive, tangible warfare and my own terrifying, abstract hypothesis. The stalemate was broken by a woman who rarely spoke. Her name was Jean, a former communications engineer who had maintained the Pacific Northwest's deep space listening array. She had been a quiet, almost invisible presence in the phage, responsible for keeping our scavenged comms and sensor equipment running. She came to my lab late one night, her face pale, holding a modified spectrum analyzer that whined with a low, discordant hum. "You were right, Dr. Thorne," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "There is a signal. It's not radio. It's not anything I've ever seen. It's biological, a patterned resonant frequency that pulses in the substrate. It's faint, but it's everywhere. For the next week, Jan and I worked in a feverish obsession. We cannibalized every piece of sensitive equipment we had, building a device capable of mapping these substrate pulses. What we found was a city overlaid with a second, invisible one, a web of shimmering energy that connected every major verdant growth nexus, and at the heart of that web, where the signal was most concentrated, was a single, blinding point of light. It was the Space Needle, the symbol of the city's old ambition. Its reach for the sky had been co-opted. It was now the primary synaptic junction for the verdant consciousness in the entire region, its spire acting as a massive antenna, broadcasting the silent will of the green tide. The discovery galvanized the phage. It was a target, a tangible objective that both Marcus's soldiers and my scientists could understand. It was the head of the snake. The plan was audacious and layered in risk. We would use the sewer network to get as close as possible, but the final approach would be on the surface, a mad dash across the open, alien ground of the Seattle Center. Gian had developed a counter-frequency device, a feedback loop generator she called the Banshee. It wouldn't destroy the network, but she theorized it could overload the primary node with a burst of chaotic, nonsensical psionic static, effectively deafening it, and, hopefully, fragmenting the local verdant consciousness back into a disorganized, non-strategic state. It was a digital lobotomy. The assault team was 12 strong, a grim mix of Marcus's veteran vectors and my own small team of technicians, including Gian and myself. The journey was tense, the substrate hum growing stronger the closer we got, a constant, low thrum that we felt in our teeth. When we emerged from a sewer grate into the shadow of the Experience Music Project's bizarre, melted architecture, we saw what the verdant had done. The grounds were a nightmare garden. The fountains were choked with luminous algae, and the walkways were patrolled by harriers, their movements no longer random, but synchronized. Like soldiers on a parade ground, they were waiting for us. The instant our boots touched the surface, the hum intensified into a piercing, psychic shriek. A sentinel bloom atop the monorail track swiveled and fixed its gaze on us. The trap was sprung, but this time, we were expecting it. Now, Marcus bellowed. A secondary team, positioned half a mile away, detonated a series of explosives coded in Kale's kiss, a calculated diversion. The Harriers, momentarily confused by the dual threats, hesitated. That was our window. We ran, our boots pounding on earth that felt strangely soft and yielding, as if the very ground was now living tissue. That's when the new defense manifested. The echoes, shimmering. Translucent figures began to coalesce from the spore-heavy air around us. They looked like us, like the friends we had lost. I saw Lena, her face serene, her arm outstretched, whispering my name on a wind that didn't exist. Marcus stumbled as 3 of his men from the Narrows Bridge mission appeared before him, their expressions pleading. They weren't solid, but the psychological impact was devastating. They were ghosts pulled from the memories of the minds the verdant had consumed. Weaponized grief designed to paralyze us. "Don't look at them," Marcus roared, his voice cracking as he fired his rifle straight through the apparition of his fallen sergeant. "They're not real!" We pushed on, a desperate stumbling charge towards the base of the needle, the air thick with whispers and the faces of our dead. We lost 2 people to Harrier attacks, their screams swallowed by the psychic static, By the time we reached the base of the great steel structure, we were down to 8. The needle itself was fused into a single, organic pillar, its steel legs wrapped in a thick chrysalis of crystalline biomass that pulsed with a blinding emerald light. We had to get the Banshee to the observation deck, to the heart of the antenna. The climb was a vertical battle. The interior elevator shafts were choked with vines that lashed out like whips, and echoes flickered in and out of existence in the claustrophobic stairwells. Halfway up, an echo of Lena appeared directly in front of me, her image so perfect, so real, that I froze. "Eris," it whispered, her voice a perfect echo of a memory. "It doesn't have to hurt. We can all be part of it. No more pain." For a terrifying second, I believed it. The promise of peace, of an end to the struggle, was a siren's call. Jean grabbed my arm, her face grim. "It's using her voice. Doctor, it's just data." Her words were a splash of ice water, and I pushed past the ghost, my heart hammering against my ribs. We reached the top. The circular observation deck, now a bioorganic chamber. The mind bloom at its center, a monstrous, pulsating flower 50 feet across. Suspended within its glowing, gelatinous core were hundreds of human bodies, their faces placid, their minds fueling the machine. The psychic pressure was immense, a physical weight that made it hard to breathe. Jean rushed to set up the Banshee, her fingers flying across the keypad as Marcus and the remaining vectors formed a desperate, last-stand perimeter. Harriers were swarming up the outside of the needle. 30 seconds, Jean yelled over the din of battle and the psychic screams of the mind bloom. An echo of Kale flickered in front of Marcus, holding his old rifle. "You let us die, Captain." It rasped. Marcus roared in defiance and charged it, his combat knife a useless tool against a phantom, but his rage a shield for the rest of us. "It's armed," Jean screamed. "Get clear!" She hit the activation sequence, and we threw ourselves behind the central core as the Banshee unleashed its payload. It wasn't an explosion of light or sound, but of silence. A wave of absolute psionic nothingness that canceled out the network's hum. The mind bloom convulsed violently, the bodies within it thrashing. The emerald light flickered, turned a sick, jaundiced yellow, and then died. The psychic shriek that had been drilling into our skulls vanished, replaced by an unnerving quiet. On the observation deck, the Harriers froze mid-stride, then collapsed, their animation gone, becoming inert piles of vines and thorns. We had done it. We had severed the head. Stumbling to the shattered windows, we looked out over the city. A slow, cascading change was rolling across the landscape. The synchronized, rhythmic pulsing of the verdant was gone. The crystalline forests still stood, but they seemed duller. The eerie, coordinated intelligence was gone, replaced by the chaotic, mindless growth of a simple plant. We hadn't killed it, but we had made it stupid again. Our victory was short-lived. As we began our descent, a new pulse echoed from the crippled mind bloom behind us. It was weaker, damaged, but it was still alive. And this pulse was different. It wasn't a signal of control. It was a single, repeating broadcast, sent outwards, towards the sky. It was a distress call, a beacon. My blood ran cold. In our desperate attempt to give the Leviathan a seizure, we had done something far, far worse. We had just let the entire uncaring universe know that there was a brain here, a wounded one, And we had just announced that we were the ones who had heard it. The silence that followed our lobotomy of the Seattle mind bloom was not the quiet of peace, but the dead air of a disconnected line. For a few weeks, the world above became a different kind of dangerous. The verdant, stripped of its coordinating intelligence, reverted to a state of chaotic, feral growth. The synchronized, strategic movements of the harriers ceased. Now they hunted on instinct, sometimes even fighting each other over territory. The flora grew with a wild, mindless abandon, a riot of beautiful, lethal botany without purpose. It was, in some ways, more perilous. The old patterns were gone, and the new world was utterly, violently unpredictable. We were no longer fighting a general. We were trapped in a cage with 1,000 starving beasts. But it was a reprieve. The psychic pressure was gone. The echoes of our dead no longer haunted the spore-filled air. In the phage, a fragile, exhausted sense of accomplishment took hold. We had faced a god and made it bleed. We had survived. It was this fragile hope that made the truth, when it came, so much more devastating. Jean brought the data to me, her face the color of old parchment. The distress call from the crippled mind bloom hadn't just stopped. It had been answered. "It's not a transmission in any sense we understand," she explained, her fingers tracing a complex waveform on her monitor. The signal was a cascade of intricate pulses originating from somewhere beyond the Kuiper Belt. It's more like a genetic update package, a command sequence being downloaded directly into the global verdant biomass. The mind bloom screamed, and something out there sent a software patch. The schism in the phage, which had been a hairline crack, split wide open. Marcus saw the new threat in the only terms he understood: an incoming enemy. He began a brutal-eyed, pragmatic campaign to turn the entire university district into a fortified kill zone. His vectors, hardened by grief and fueled by a renewed sense of purpose, worked around the clock, setting up choke points, clearing fields of fire, and retrofitting our remaining store of Kale's Kiss into proximity mines. His strategy was simple and grim. We would make our last stand here. We would turn the phage into a tomb so costly that whatever was coming would remember the price. I saw it as digging our own graves. "You're building a target, Marcus," I pleaded with him, our argument echoing through the cold concrete of the command center. "We can't fight this." We signaled our existence to something that treats a planetary consciousness as a faulty piece of hardware. It's not sending an army. It's sending a repairman, a pest controller. We can't win a war against that. Because to it, we're not even a war. We're an infestation. "So, what's your plan?" "Eris." He shot back, his hands stained with grease from modifying a heavy machine gun. "We just roll over, let it scrub us from the face of our own planet." "We changed the definition of us," I said, the idea taking shape in my mind even as I spoke it. A concept born of pure, scientific desperation. The only reason it's coming is because the Verdant registered a foreign biological agent, a threat to its system use. So we stop being foreign. We become part of the system. He stared at me as if I'd lost my mind, and perhaps I had. The changes on the surface supported my terrifying hypothesis. The Verdant wasn't dying or healing, it was reconfiguring. The chaotic growth began to organize again, but not as it had before. The delicate crystalline ferns were being reabsorbed, their mass broken down and repurposed. In their place, new structures were growing, great, chitinous pillars that spiraled towards the sky. their surfaces covered in what looked like biological circuitry. The planet was being rebuilt into a massive receiver, preparing for the arrival of its master. We had called them the Sours, my team. What was left of it began a frantic new project. We had samples of the verdant spores, the original chrysanema. We had the concentrated protein from our own O-negative blood. My theory was a monstrous piece of biological heresy. Could we create a symbiotic merger? Could we engineer a controlled infection, introducing a dormant, modified strain of the verdant into our own bodies, a strain that was keyed to our unique human DNA, that would register to the Sour's senses not as a blight, but as a sanctioned native mutation? We would hide in plain sight, becoming a new, strange kind of human-verdant hybrid, a species of intelligent lichen on the skin of a god. We would become the perfect camouflage. When I presented the plan to the 50-odd survivors that made up our world, the room devolved into chaos. To many, especially Marcus's soldiers, it was the ultimate act of surrender, a desecration of their own humanity. They had fought and watched their friends die to stop the green tide, not to inject it into their veins. They chose Marcus's path to die as humans, on their feet, fighting. Marcus looked at me with a final, weary pity. "You are a good man, Eris," he said, turning his back on me. "I'll remember that." The phage was broken. He took 35 of the able-bodied survivors and moved to the surface, beginning the fortification of the engineering quad, a concrete fortress from which they would wage their final, hopeless war. 20 of us remained below. Jian, a handful of my other scientists, and a collection of souls who were too scared, too tired, or perhaps just desperate enough to believe in my insane gamble. We became pariahs in our own home, the sounds of Marcus's construction echoing from above like the hammering on our own coffins. Our work became a grim race against time. The Sour's signal was growing stronger, the reconfiguration of the planet's surface accelerating. Massive, arching structures of black, chitinous material were now linking the new pillars, forming a canopy over the city that blotted out the sun and pulsed with a slow, alien energy. The process of creating the symbiotic agent, the Thorn Strain, as Jian grimly called it, was the most difficult and terrifying work of my life. We had to find a way to render the verdant spores inert enough not to trigger viridian lung, yet active enough to integrate with our cellular structure. We had to code our own unique protein sequence into it, making our biology a recognized part of the new world. We used the last of our O-negative blood, not as a weapon against the verdant, but as a bridge to it. We were building a key, not a cure. The first human trial was me. There was no other choice. It was my theory, my sin, in the sterile quiet of the medbay, with Jian monitoring my vitals, her face a mask of clinical concern. I injected the glowing, faintly green serum into my own arm. The initial effect was a wave of fire, every nerve ending screaming as the alien biology fought for purchase. My body convulsed, my temperature spiked, and I fell into a delirium that lasted for 3 days. In that fever dream, I felt it, the hum, the silent song of the verdant network. But it wasn't a hostile intrusion anymore. It was a presence, a vast, impersonal, and ancient consciousness. And I was a single, new note in its chorus. I felt the roots deep in the earth, the slow, patient pulse of the receiver pillars taking shape above, the silent, waiting anticipation of the entire planetary biome. When I woke up, I was changed. My skin had a faint, almost pearlescent green undertone. Fine, moss-like filaments, barely visible, grew at my hairline, but my mind was clear, clearer than it had ever been. I could feel the phage around me, not just as a physical space, but as a void in the network, a pocket of silence. I could feel the 35 human hotspots of heat and fear and defiance in Marcus's fortress above, and I could feel something else, a pressure building in the solar system. Something vast and cold and utterly without emotion was approaching. The repairman was coming. The others followed my lead, one by one, their fear of extinction overriding their fear of transformation. Each underwent the same agonizing fever, the same terrifying metamorphosis. We became a new tribe, a small enclave of strange, new beings huddled in the darkness as the world above was being prepared for a visitor. We were no longer fully human, but we were alive. The day it arrived, we felt it before we saw it. The constant, low hum of the verdant network suddenly swelled into a single, deafening chord of arrival. The entire planet seemed to hold its breath. Jian's long-range sensors went haywire, detecting a gravitational anomaly so massive it was bending space-time around it. It wasn't a ship. It was a being, a creature of folded space and biological machinery, a thing the size of a small moon that unfolded itself in high orbit like a great, dark flower. The Sour had arrived from our monitors. We watched it deploy. It didn't send down ships or soldiers. It sent down a wave of shimmering, golden energy that washed over the planet's surface. And where the wave passed, the verdant responded. The great black pillars pulsed. The canopy overhead glowed, and the entire reconfigured landscape sang in unison. Then came the second wave, a cleansing pulse. We watched Marcus's fortress on our thermal scanners. We saw the pulse wash over it. We saw the 35 heat signatures flare brightly for a single, brilliant instant, and then vanish. Not into death, but into nothing. They were unwritten, their matter and energy broken down and reabsorbed by the network. It was a deletion, not a battle. It was pest control. In the silence of our lab, we felt the cleansing wave pass over the phage, over us. And it did nothing. It registered our unique biological signature, a strange but sanctioned part of the local system, and moved on. We had hidden ourselves within the monster, and the exterminator had passed us by. We had survived, but as the Sour began its true work, its immense, planetary scale gardening, I looked at my hands, at the faint green patterns now visible beneath my skin, and felt a cold, profound dread. We had saved ourselves from extinction, but we had lost our humanity in the bargain, and now we were a permanent, sentient part of a garden belonging to a cosmic horror whose purpose we could not even begin to comprehend. We were no longer the weeds. We were just a strange, forgotten flower in a pot that was infinitely larger and darker than we had ever imagined. The aftermath of the Sour's arrival was not an occupation. It was a renovation. We, the 20 survivors of the Thorn strain, became silent witnesses to the remaking of a world. Our new senses, a strange and unsettling fusion of human consciousness and the Verdant's network, perceived the Sour's work not as a series of events, but as a single, continuous act of creation. It was like living inside the mind of a god as it dreamed a new reality into existence. The sky, once a familiar canvas of blue and white, was now permanently veiled by the iridescent, chitinous canopy that pulsed with the slow, steady rhythm of a colossal heart. Sunlight filtered through it as a diffuse, emerald twilight, and the concepts of day and night became irrelevant memories. We no longer felt hunger, thirst, or the bite of the cold. The symbiosis sustained us, our bodies drawing energy directly from the network, our biology inextricably woven into the planet's new metabolism. We were, for all intents and purposes, immortal, and it felt like a curse. Our existence in the phage became a quiet study in ontological dread. We were ghosts in a machine we had willingly entered, while our bodies were safe. Our minds were under constant, subtle pressure. The vast, impersonal consciousness of the global verdant network was a siren song of oblivion, promising a serene end to the struggle of individuality. A few of our numbers succumbed to it, their minds slowly dissolving into the green tide, their bodies becoming still, placid figures who would sit for weeks on end, their eyes unfocused, their consciousness just another drop in the planetary ocean. They weren't dead, but they were no longer themselves. They had become passive nodes, and we mourned them with a grief that had no name. It was Jian who first gave our new reality a framework. She had converted the lab into an observatory of the soul, her instruments no longer measuring radiation, but the intricate flows of psionic energy within the network. "It's a nursery," she said one cycle, her voice a flat, toneless thing that had lost its human inflection. Her face, like all of ours, was now patterned with fine, luminous green veins that pulsed in time with the canopy above. The sour isn't a conqueror, it's a cultivator. It found a world rich in the raw materials of life, the primordial verdant, and it is preparing the soil. It's building a cradle for something else. Her words painted a picture more terrifying than any invasion. We were not the subjects of this creation. We were merely part of the infrastructure. We were the living wiring in the walls of a room being built for a guest we could not comprehend. We watched as the sour directed the verdant to build new, colossal structures on the surface. Great, spiraling towers that seemed to scrape the underbelly of the orbital being itself. Their purpose utterly alien. We felt the flow of exotic energies through the root systems beneath our feet, a cosmic nourishment being pumped into the planet. Earth was being gestated. The turning point came not from a plan, but from a memory. I had retreated into myself, trying to build mental walls against the siren song of the network, when a vivid image of Marcus surfaced in my mind. I saw him on the day he left, his face set like granite, his choice to die as a human, a final and defiant act of identity. I felt the echo of his rage, his stubbornness, his absolute refusal to yield. And in that moment, I realized the fundamental difference between us and the verdant. The network was a perfect, harmonious chorus, but it was a chorus singing a single, monotonous note. Our minds, even in their diminished state, were a cacophony. They were filled with grief, love, rage, doubt, memory, and contradiction. We were chaotic, unpredictable data in a system built for absolute order. That was our weapon. That was our hope. I gathered the remaining dozen who were still truly sentient and shared my revelation. The sour's cleansing wave passed us by because our biology registered as native, I explained. the words feeling clumsy, inadequate to describe the psionic reality. But it has never encountered a native component with free will, with memory. The system knows what we are, but not who we are. We're not a blight anymore. We're a rogue idea, a ghost of the world that came before. We began to fight back, not with poison or weapons, but with our own minds. We stopped building walls against the network and instead began to project into it. We focused our collective consciousness, our remaining shards of humanity, and we began to sing, not with our voices, but with our souls. We poured our memories into the substrate. We pushed the memory of Kale's stubborn loyalty, of Lena's fierce, grieving intellect, of the thousands of unspoken acts of courage and sacrifice that had led us to this point. We projected the mathematical elegance of a Bach fugue, the chaotic brilliance of a Pollock painting, the heart-wrenching narrative of a Shakespearean tragedy. We flooded our small corner of the network with the beautiful, messy, illogical chaos of human experience. The effect was instantaneous and profound. The verdant in the immediate vicinity of the phage began to change. The mindless, functional growth patterns faltered. Around the entrance to our underground home, the crystalline flora began to grow again, but this time their structures were not random. They formed intricate, impossible arches reminiscent of a Gothic cathedral. The phosphorescent moss on the walls arranged itself into swirling patterns that looked like Van Gogh's Starry Night. The network, in our sector, was trying to process the illogical data we were feeding it, and it was expressing its confusion by mimicking our memories. The Sour's perfect garden now had a patch of wild, beautiful, and utterly defiant weeds. The Sour noticed. We felt its vast, cold attention focus on our anomaly for the first time since its arrival. A wave of pure, analytical pressure washed over us. A psychic scan so intense it felt like our minds were being disassembled molecule by molecule. We braced for deletion, for the final, silent erasure that had claimed Marcus and his people. We responded the only way we could. We sang louder. We projected the feeling of a child's laughter, the warmth of the sun on skin, the defiant, irrational hope of a last stand, and then nothing. The pressure receded. The Sour did not delete us. The intense focus of its attention moved on, back to its grand, cosmic construction. It was the act of a being that encounters a strange, harmless bit of mold in a corner of its project. It was not a threat. It was not a priority. It was simply an anomaly, a curiosity to be walled off and ignored. In the long cycles that followed, we found our new purpose. We were no longer survivors hiding from a monster. We were custodians of a memory. We became the gardeners of our own small, impossible patch of earth. We learned to consciously shape the verdant around us, using our collective memories to build a sanctuary, a living museum of the world we had lost. We cultivated flowers that chimed with the melodies of forgotten symphonies. We grew trees whose bark was etched with the poetry of Keats and Neruda. We shaped a small, quarantined corner of this new, alien planet into a testament to the beautiful, chaotic species that had once called it home. We never knew what the Sour was building its nursery for. We would see great, silent ships, darker than the space between stars, arrive and depart, but their purpose remained beyond our grasp. Our existence was a paradox. We had achieved a form of immortality, but were forever bound to the tomb of our world. We had lost our humanity, but our purpose had become to preserve its ghost. I often stand at the entrance to our sanctuary, looking up at the pulsing emerald canopy, and I can feel both the vast, uncaring mind of the cosmic gardener and the defiant, human song of the garden we have made. We are a forgotten footnote in a galactic story we will never understand, but we are still here, and in the heart of this silent, green world, a strange and stubborn flower, born of sacrifice and memory, continues to bloom.